Choosing a Wi-Fi system or a router in your home these days can be a daunting task. And if you're looking at this right now and you're someone who's starting to develop your smart home, I've produced a buying guide right here that will help you go ahead and make a smart purchase and be ready for the future of smart home. So let's get going. The Internet of Things will change the realm of routers and Wi-Fi dramatically, and we've already seen some of these changes start to occur with the introduction of devices like the Amazon Echo series of products, HomePod, and of course Google Home's whole suite of products. Those devices are now pulling a lot of data in a lot of cases, and this means that you can have a really distributed network. On top of this, you can be utilizing a lot of network bandwidth with things like smart home cameras. On top of that, as we go forward, there are other considerations that you need to have as it relates to a smart home router. So let's go through a few things that I think are absolutely required on your router to be prepared for the next 5 to 10 years of at-home Wi-Fi and router coverage. 802.11ac. Now that is a wireless standard that was developed some time ago, and you're going to want something with Wave 2 at the very least, and something called multi-user, multi-input, multi-output, or MIMO we can call it, MIMO, or I don't care what we call it anyways. That is essentially the ability to maintain multiple connections with multiple devices at the same time. Now, Wave 2 is important because it's just the newer standard for 802.11ac, but that MIMO, that is really, really important as far as I'm concerned going forward in your smart home. And the reason I say that is it will maximize the efficiency of essentially the wireless bandwidth that you have access to. Now, I have a couple of charts here from Cisco, and they've done a great job illustrating how what was called single user multi-input, multi-output, that methodology, how that is not as strong as the multi-user version of this, and why I'm recommending that this is on any router you go and purchase. Now, what they're describing essentially boils down to the fact that you can be, in certain situations, governed by the slowest device on your home network if you don't have multi-user, multi-input, multi-output capabilities. What it does essentially for you is ensure that every device is connected at its speed, but it doesn't limit your other devices waiting for that slowest device, because it can move on to other things and group items kind of together in terms of how they're being utilized on your overall wireless bandwidth. So really what I'm saying when I say MIMO, what I'm ultimately saying is that capability allows you to maintain more connections at a faster pace. The second thing you're going to need is at least a dual band system. So you're going to want to make sure, and this comes with almost every router that's out there today, a 2.4 gigahertz and a 5 or 5.8 gigahertz dual band router. Now, that ensures that you have the ability to connect on different wireless networks to different devices. And why is that so important? Well, it allows you to manage your traffic differently and put those higher consumption devices like cameras and Google Home hubs or devices like that that are pulling lots of bandwidth or utilizing a lot of your bandwidth. You can put those on the 5 gigahertz signal, which is capable of faster speeds. I don't believe at this point you're required to have a tri-band or a 3-band router or mesh system at all. What happens with the Netgear Orbi is they do have a 3-band system, and we'll get in detail a little more about this in the future, but ultimately what they do with that third radio is they keep all the internal traffic between the mesh system on that third band, and that frees up the rest of the system or the rest of the radios essentially to deal with your outside network devices. So it really helps them optimize speeds, but it is not a requirement right now as far as I'm concerned. What I'd like to see for the third component of the specifications here is at least AC 1200 or better. Now that's actually describing the speed of your router and the maximum throughput that it can attain. Now that will be split over the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz and or what's called 802.11n, 802.11b, G, all those older standards, and the AC standard. So you will want to see at least 1200. Now, there are routers we're going to talk about today that have upwards of 3000, and I've seen a 5300 Asus router, and they mean it when they're talking about that kind of overall throughput. There are some additional things that I'd like to see on your smart home router, but these are not necessarily requirements, and the first example of this is something called 802.15.4. Now, this is another internet protocol wireless protocol or wireless standard that actually Zigbee is based on. So if your router or your mesh system has the capability of speaking 802.15.4, what I'll tell you right now, and we're going to talk about this in future videos, is that you will be future-proof with a new standard or protocol that is coming, and I think has the opportunity to really change the Internet of Things industry. And so that capability being on your router, I think, is really important, but not something critical to you right now. The ability to create a mesh system in your home is something that I wouldn't say is necessarily a requirement for everyone. I mean, lots of homes can get away with just one single router and be good there. But if you have a little bit of a larger home or you're not sure, the ability to create a mesh network in the future is very important for you. One of the best things I've seen coming on routers these days, and again, not a requirement, but something that I think is a relatively good idea, is a security option or a security management option on board. So what you will see on lots of routers now is direct integration with McAfee or Trend Micro, and the ability to essentially enable services that manage whole home network security instead of just being antivirus or firewall protection on a PC or another device. A couple more things really quickly that I think are good things to have on your router. The ability to have direct connection to NAS storage or good connection to NAS storage, NAS. So this is network storage that I think is going to become more and more important as more camera manufacturers give us that local storage option. Wisecam has figured this out, even though lots of people think that cloud is the future. I think there's a big want on the market today for NAS storage, and the ability to put our smart home camera storage local and connected directly to our router is very beneficial. The other thing would be integration with services like Google Home and Amazon's voice assistant. Those integration points will become more and more useful over time. McAfee is a great example of a service that could be on your router and integrated essentially with Google Home and Amazon's voice assistant as well. So now that we've talked about what should be on your router or your router system, your Wi-Fi system, let's talk about some specific models that I think really anyone can go out, purchase, implement, and be really successful with. So there's nothing on this list of 4 that I don't think you could buy and be really unhappy with. So number 1, Google Wi-Fi provides a system where you can go ahead and purchase one, and that will relatively give you about 1,500 square feet in your home, but if you need more, you can continue to add Mesh Wi-Fi access points throughout your system, and they sell in groups of 3, and ultimately it comes in around $300 for a set of 3. Now, in terms of speed, the Google Wi-Fi is a little bit on the slower side. They don't have that multi-user, multi-input, multi-output that we've talked about. They are AC 1200, so they're lower on the overall throughput spectrum as well. So in terms of managing your smart home in the future, while you will have 3 access points, some of that will be eaten up by that back channel traffic that basically heads from one Google Wi-Fi device to the next, and then to the internet. You will eat up lots of bandwidth there. But at $300, this is a good, relatively low budget solution for your whole smart home. Now, another thing about Google Wi-Fi is, and I've spoken with Google support about this surprises me a little bit, they don't have the 802.15.4 support. They're on hub versions of the product, which is really a very similar product to Google Wi-Fi. They tend to be a little more expensive, but essentially commissioned out to other makers. So Asus makes one of these, and they have that 802.15.4 support on board. So some of those on hubs actually interest me just as much. The second set of devices here are from Netgear, and they're the Orbi Mesh Wi-Fi system. Now, in general, when you go and you buy these, they can range a little bit in terms of price, but right now on Amazon, they are $370 US. So they are a little more pricey, but they do have an increased set of specifications. Now, normally for that $370, you're getting 2 devices. They are quite large, and that's one of the knocks against them, but they are AC3000, so that's quite a jump. And the other thing is they're that tri-band model. So what that means is they're using one of their radios for all of that back channel communication, thereby leaving the other 2 radios and a lot of the throughput on these devices available to your other 2 radios and all of your other different devices in your home. This makes them the tested, and this is tested by many different companies and different individuals. They are the fastest out there. Now, when you couple that with the multi-user, multi-input, multi-output capability of these devices, they are incredibly powerful, and I'm sure that no matter what you have in your home, it's going to be handled by the Orbi. If you haven't already heard of Eero, well, you're about to, because Amazon actually just purchased this company. Now, what does that mean? Well, I think we're going to see some very interesting things from Amazon in terms of how they go and integrate this product. It's already relatively integrated well. They already have Amazon Voice Assistant integration into the Eero system of devices. Now, Eero's big boast here is that essentially they are multi-user, multi-input, multi-output. They have tri-band on the Eero router or the Eero access point, and they have beacons that you can place throughout your home to get another 1,000 square feet. The big knock on Eero is ultimately that they are a little bit too expensive. For 2,500 square feet in your home, you would need an Eero and a beacon, and that device that would then run you around $300 US. Overall, they look great. They have 802.15.4, which we've talked about, so they are capable of something called Thread, and that's that new standard that we're going to be talking about here on the channel as we go forward. They're also capable of great encryption and some VPN options, and in general, you'll find that with most of the options here, but this is really powerful stuff in a really small form factor that looks great and is ever extensible, or extendable rather, in your home. Now then, let's talk about Asus. And Asus is an interesting company, and actually one of our followers here, Steven Irad is his name, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, but he's been showing me some statistics from a 5-year-old Asus router, and he has an immense amount of equipment on this 5-year-old router that is still heralded today as one of the fastest routers on the market. Now, the 68U, and he has the 1900 version of this here, that device is still on CNET. It's still rated as #1 overall, and it's a really old router now. Now, what it doesn't have is that multi-user, multi-input, multi-output capability, but Asus updates firmware and capabilities all the time. They put out new capabilities to their routers all the time. If you think about Asus in general as a company, they have had the top routers or been named the top router company every year for the last 6 years. This is something they boast on their website, and truly, when I look back through my routers over the last 10 to 15 years, lots of them have been Asus routers. And this is true when I've moved and then had to go get something new, it's been an Asus router. Now, what I'm going to talk about is called the Asus AC86U, and this is a AC2900 router with multi-user, multi-input, multi-output capability. The interface on Asus routers is excellent, and this means your management of these devices is both configurable and easy if you want it to be. I really enjoy that. They've also added an app recently that gives you another option for management of your devices, and you can also monitor things. One other really sneaky thing about Asus is the ability to mesh network their routers. Now, a lot of their routers that are out there right now have something on them called AI Mesh, and they essentially, again, keep a lot of their routers updated and give them this capability. So you could use lots of routers that come from Asus in the last 5 to 10 years as a mesh secondary point. So if you have an Asus router in your home, check with Asus, check their compatibility list for AI Mesh and see if you can update or upgrade your existing router to become a secondary mesh point. Now, obviously you wouldn't have the really fast speeds of, say, an 86U here, but you would have the capability of having a mesh system in a relatively inexpensive way, because when I talk about the 86U, it's around $250 US for that. You can go up to $300 and get a slightly faster gaming AC3100 router, and they have an even more expensive option as well. And those gaming routers give you access to some really interesting gaming features, because I'm kind of a geek in case you haven't noticed. But anyways, all of the different features on these Asus routers, in the end, they lead me to be my #1 choice. Now, again, any of the 4 routers that I've talked about here, or router systems that I've talked about, they're going to work in your smart home, and they're going to work for a long time. You're not really going to make a bad choice here. So let's just go through a bit of a summary here. The Eros are great, but I find them a little bit expensive for the coverage that you're getting, and you're probably going to need a lot of them. You're attached to Amazon, so I worry a little bit about the data privacy on that side of thing. On the flip side, they're a little bit faster than something like Google Wi-Fi, and Google Wi-Fi, I feel a little bit better about my data privacy with Google. Obviously, they're going to use data they can get for advertisements and things like that, but in general, they've handled my data in the past with a lot of respect. So I appreciate that. The Google Wi-Fi knock there is really the speed throughput, and strangely enough, the inability to have 802.15.4, even though they're a large leader in that. So I wonder if someday those devices will just be updated to work with that. Netgear's Orbi system is massive, fast, but ultimately very expensive, and I think their app and their management tools aren't as good as the other makers on this list. The final solution here to me is Asus, and that AC86U I think is the perfect level for a lot of people, and then go aftermarket or utilize an existing Asus router you have in your home to create a mesh. You're not always going to need the most powerful router as your secondary mesh router. As long as you have a decent router there, I think you're going to be able to do just fine in a smart home for the next 5 to 10 years for sure. If you enjoyed this content, this is the kind of thing I'm producing over on Patreon for my patrons. Now, they're providing me a relatively small monthly fee, and this goes a long ways to helping me as a content creator. But on top of that, what they're getting is detailed analysis and in-depth topics in terms of the smart home, the Internet of Things, and things that I can't necessarily share over here on YouTube, because ultimately people on YouTube are disappearing from my content as I get deeper and deeper into topics, because sometimes it just alienates people when I'm really detailed in terms of my description. So, you know what? Head over to Patreon, have a look. The link is down below. Join us there, and I can give you really in-depth analysis of topics. And they're already benefiting. We've only been running for a couple of months, and they're already benefiting over there from some of my insights into the industry. So please join us over on Patreon, as well as join us here on the channel. So here come all the links.